Sony cancels more live service games from two studios. Bluepoint Games and Bend Studios were supposedly the developers behind the games.
That byline was outdated, I will say.
Because they are?
Yeah.
Yeah. A Bloomberg report from Jason Schreier confirms 2 live service titles were canceled, quote, following a recent review by Sony Group Corp's PlayStation. Schreier confirmed that of the 2 studios, Bluepoint Games and Bend Studio, Bluepoint had been working on a God of War live service title. A reevaluation of Sony's future has led the company to become wary of live service titles, pushing back a number of live service titles in late 2023, eventually followed up by the cancellation of a live service game based in the Last of Us series and the massive failure of Concord, which had been heavily funded by Sony. Alternatively, the unexpected success of Helldivers 2 showed the model of live services titles isn't dead yet, along with the PvP extraction shooter Marathon set to be released sometime in the future. Schreier reported in early August 2024 on gaming podcast Frames, that's supposed to be Frames Per Second.
But they said it's called Friends Per
Is
Second.
it called Friends Per Second?
Friends Per Second,
I thought it was
yeah.
called the Frames Per Second podcast. That Marathon was in development hell. Bend Studio community manager Kevin McAllister would comment on the cancellations, tweeting, quote, "We still plan on creating cool shit." I also saw early reporting today, before we went live, that neither studio knew that their games were getting canceled until the new.
I have no surprise at that.
Which is not the first time that Jason Schreier's been ahead of the companies,
Yeah.
in its reporting and getting word before the employees do. So the big takeaways from this is that Bend and Bluepoint were reportedly working on live service games. I would argue a waste of both studio talents.
Yeah, especially Bluepoint.
Especially Bluepoint. And Bluepoint specifically working on a God of War live service game. Now, Bluepoint, we do know, spent 2020 and 2021 working on helping out development with God of War Ragnarok, spending 2 years helping out with that project. Maybe it was 21 and 22, but you get the point. The game launched in 22, earlier 22. It's been 2 years working on Ragnarok, all right? And then Bend, we didn't know what was doing. Bend Studios, last known for, of course, Days Gone, a critical flop, semi-commercial success. At least the players were fairly satisfied with that game, but overall, I think seen as a rare PlayStation miss in the era of where they were just putting out banger after banger after banger.
Yeah.
Clearly, right now, they are not in that era anymore. And so now, with the cancellation of this, you look at the first-party studio lineup and what we've already gotten from first-party studios, what we're going to get being Ghost of Yotei, Death Stranding 2, and Intergalactic. I'm missing one other one. I'm missing something else, but Wolverine. And you look at that and go, all right, that's the rest of the PlayStation 5 generation.
Yeah.
We know exactly what's going to happen, which then allows you to look at PlayStation 5 as a whole so far. And this generation is not holding up. It's not really pushing the medium forward in any way, like sort of we saw with the PS4. And that's disappointing.
And I think the live service model is kind of a part of that stagnation.
I agree.
It makes these companies see what seems to be just an easy profitability in getting someone to play a game, potentially for free, but one that you're going to entice them with those microtransactions.
Yeah.
But, at a certain point when everybody's doing something like that, the impact's going to go down. The amount of money you're specifically going to get is going to go down unless you really have a solid product, like Fortnite's been able to carve out for himself. But, I mean, you hear less and less things happening in Apex Legends. When was the last time we've really gotten this, a big update from there?
That people were excited about in
Yeah.
Apex? It's been a while. And my understanding is, I forget what Respawn is working on now since their Star Wars games got canceled.
Yeah.
So yeah, that one's a tough one to hear. And their Titanfall sort of reboot got canceled. Yeah, the industry's in a tricky place when it comes to live service games because we do have examples of success. You named it in the article. Helldivers 2. Huge success, specifically with PlayStation. PlayStation's been struggling to find footing in this era as well. On top of that, we covered it recently. Shuhei Yoshida, former head of PlayStation Studios, who then headed up PlayStation's indie department for the last 5 years, has left PlayStation officially in the last week, and then did an interview with Kinda Funny. And there's some, a couple of headlines popping off about that. The Bloodborne remaster / remake was kind of circling around because he commented on that and basically saying, yes, we hear that you want it. We don't have, as far as I know, there's no plans to really move on it because it's a tricky thing because Miyazaki has a lot of pride in that. So there's probably an element of like, don't touch that. That's mine. And then on top of that, who would produce that remaster/remake. It's hard to tell. Shuhei also commented on the idea of there being too many remasters and remakes in the gaming thing. And he was like, guys, just because something gets remastered or remade doesn't mean other things aren't being made. Like, it just allows us to keep revenue flowing, get a little extra money so that we can continue to reinvest in these other projects and so forth. So that's why you get so many Last of Us remasters and remakes and so forth like that, because it fattens the pockets and allows us to get new titles like an Intergalactic out the door. Okay. And on top of that, Shuhei, back to this topic at hand, said when he was head of PlayStation's first-party studios, his perspective was Call of Duty's killing it. Why compete with that model? Why even do that, So, you really saw in his era of being head of PlayStation Studios a move away from multiplayer titles. You saw less kill zones. You saw less resistance games. You saw more Spider-Man, God of War, Last of Us, Ghost of Tsushima.
The recognizable
Horizon
names.
Zero Dawn, that big era of PlayStation where they were really firing on all cylinders. A large part of that was due to his influences being head of PlayStation Studios and with Sean Layden being CEO of SIE. And then we move into that Jim Ryan era. Mm-hmm. And that Jim Ryan era is where it gets really, really tricky, because we do still see some successes in the Jim Ryan era. The launch of the PlayStation 5, God of War Ragnarok.
Well, you can argue the launch of the PlayStation 5 was not a strong point, but you can also balance that out by saying how the time was.
God of War Ragnarok, Last of Us Part 2, sort of the tail end of the Ghost of Tsushima development with those last two titles that I just named. But God of War Ragnarok, Returnal, a lot of great acquisitions such as Housemarque and Bluepoint and Bungie, falling under that from the Jim Ryan era. And Shuhei Yoshida commented on that is when Jim Ryan took over, PlayStation actually got a lot more funding, got a lot more access to resources so that they could expand on the idea of doing multiplayer live service things. That's all a Jim Ryan thing, is the live service push. And it's not taking away from what the other guys have already been doing. It's just additive. So Sony gave PlayStation a lot more resources for that. And as of right now, it looks like all those resources are being squandered.
Because when you look at them, how many of them have successful live service titles?
One.
Yeah. Well, two. Destiny,
but that's not a PlayStation thing.
Yeah, it's not built off their own,
yes.
The backs of the labor. It's, it was multi-platform. They bought it.
That was an EA success. That was a Bungie success.
Yes.
Can Bungie reproduce that with Marathon? I don't think so, because you're chasing a trend that really wasn't that big of a trend to begin with. Extraction shooters, sure, are fun, have their place, so I've heard. But what is the extraction shooter?
Well, it's certainly not going to come from Marathon. One of the core reasons, you were talking about like God of War live service titles. When you're going to make one of these, it has to make sense. Yeah. Last of Us made sense because it had a multiplayer game that originally functioned as just the usual multiplayer that was attached to a single-player story.
But let's be honest, we didn't want that. We just wanted another mode like we got in the first game.
Yeah.
That's all we wanted.
And clearly,
Naughty Dog felt passionate and wanted to spin it off and expand it and grow it. Remember, the Factions wasn't supposed to be its own standalone thing. It was supposed to be a mode. And then it was a mode that was going to come later, a la Ghost of Tsushima Legends.
Yeah.
And then it just kept growing and growing and growing until it turned into its own game. On top of that, Jim Ryan was like, yeah, I'll put Last of Us as a live service game. This is weird. Bluepoint working on a live service game, one, that's squandering Bluepoint's talents, and it's not at all what any of us really want. And two, we don't want a God of War live service game. Who wants that?
And to tie it into that, going back to Marathon, I know there's not like a lot of fanfare for the original game that this one's based off of, but it is like as opposite as you can get. It's a single player game. It's very exploratory. It's got a big focus on gunplay. To make it a PvP extraction shooter, it just kind of comes out of nowhere. Why don't you?
Does that matter?
It does matter, because it's like, well, maybe you're limiting yourself by making it a sequel of this thing. When it could just be a standalone element.
Let me rephrase the question. Does the original Marathon game matter?
Apparently, it's very high quality and slept on.
Does it matter?
What does that mean, though?
It's an irrelevant game. It's a game that sure, slept on and stuff. Nobody heard about. We didn't know about Marathon until Bungie Marathon got announced.
Well, then, more to my point.
Like, it's not like a System Shock or Deus Ex or like Vampire Masquerade Bloodlines or things like that. Like, it wasn't like a game with like a cult following that people cared about, really. This is a game that came out, sure, it was quality, but it went away. It faded in the background. So taking that IP and then turning it into something else, I don't think is a problem, because the IP didn't matter in the first place.
I think it is a problem, because their mindset of having to go off an existing IP to then make an extraction shooter shows that it's kind of the same thought process behind God of War live service. It's just, It makes
But-
no sense for the kind of game you're trying to
But
make. You're
Bungie's
just doing it
Marathon,
anyway.
I'm going to tell you right now, Bungie's Marathon is going to have nothing to do with the OG Marathon.
It's not.
It's not going to
no.
be in that world. The rules are going to be different. The rules
See,
of
then,
the world
exactly.
are going to be different.
So why make it Marathon based off that?
Because why like it's just IP. Like,
I think it's just indicative.
You're like the Arcane Prey is more successful than the original Prey.
Yeah.
But those games have nothing to do with each other. They just stuck a name on it, right?
Right.
So like it doesn't matter, but because it had an IP tied to it, it garnered more attention in the announcement of the game, right? But when it came to the actual execution of the game, that doesn't matter. I would argue that is the same for Marathon.
Well, Prey actually had like a bunch of people that played it back in the
Oh
day.
yeah.
You know, Marathon's an obscure slept-on game. Prey was an in-the-time game that could,
Yes.
easily attract old players while also looking new on its own
Yeah.
and interesting to new players.
Yeah, but like, listen, man, they grabbed an IP and they stuck it on something. Like it doesn't matter. It's not going to hurt the game. It's not going to draw it back. It's not going to do anything. Like that point, I don't think is relevant in this case. God of War is a different point.
No, that all ties into it to show that in combination with God of War, they don't know what the fuck they're doing. They just want live service titles, and they're not being focused with it. I mean, remember, we talked about how they had 12 live service games.
Yeah.
Why would you need 12? And they cut back on those.
And even
last
when they had the
21.
12, they only envisioned 4 or 5 working.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, is that a good method of how to make games?
No.
I can't conceive of that at all.
No, I don't
This
think
has
so
been
either.
faulty from the very beginning, and I don't think it's going to end anywhere like positive, because Helldivers 2 was an entire surprise to everybody, and PlayStation, the other game that's kind of in that same mode.
And to your
Marvel
point,
Rivals,
Helldivers 2 stayed true to what Helldivers was.
It did, yes.
Yeah.
Which I think made it more fun when they were able to build a pot on top of it. The key difference being is that this is the same exact studio and probably the same exact people who worked on the original Helldivers working on the second one. But yeah, this is. I wouldn't be surprised if we see like no more, maybe like 1, 2 more.
I mean, we got to have the conversation. We've got games that are announced already.
Yeah.
Haven Studios Fair Games. Does it make it to market? I don't think so. I think that game's dead in the water, dead in the crib. I don't even know if we see it come back in whatever this next PlayStation state of play presentation experience, whatever PlayStation has next where they have a presentation for it. I don't think we see Fair Games there. I think they're going to within the next 3 to 4 months cancel Fair Games and shut down Haven Studio. Which that sucks to say, but that's what it's going to be. Marathon is, I think, is a different story because Bungie's pedigree is large enough to where they're willing to see that forward. But if the rumors are true that it is in development hell, when are we going to see that game? When are we going? Not only are we going to like have that game released, when are we going to see Marathon next? It could happen at this next state of play, or we could not see it for another year, depending on how long this takes, right? And in that, how many other titles are working that we don't know about? We didn't know about these 2 titles. We still don't know what Bend was working on, who I feel so bad for.
It's screwed all
Ben
over.
Studio history with Siphon Filter, which was a successful IP for the scale of what Bend is, right? And then go on to work to make an Uncharted game, which was received fairly well. That I still think that Uncharted game is better than the first one. And then not really be able to get out of the shadow of Naughty Dog. Days Gone completely flopped. And then spend the last couple of years being like, all right, well, you're going to help make Last of Us Factions. You're going to help make an Uncharted remake. You're going to help make all these other things, right? And then only to then be given a live service title. Now, whatever that is, it is what it is. But now they got nothing. So what has been delivered to PlayStation in the last couple of years? Bluepoint at least has the benefit of being like, hey, we've delivered 2 really great remakes that sold really well and were critically acclaimed. So Bluepoint is safe, I think, right? They're safe. It's just unfortunate, maybe some layoffs, but it's unfortunate that, they had a game canceled and so forth. It's probably smart that they had this game canceled. I don't think it would have been a success. But Bend is not safe. Bend has not provided something for PlayStation in many years, right? The best thing that they've done is a Uncharted spin-off game for a system that failed. Not their fault, but still, right? What has been produced that has been a top-selling thing for PlayStation? Not a lot. And I don't think that's on them. Talented studio. They've got a pedigree of great games, but they've had major leadership changes. They've not had a clear direction in the last 10 years. And is that right? 10-ish years, right? They've not had a clear direction of their own, and they've been stripped of every opportunity to be able to grow and develop into a studio that could really provide a strong IP. I am in the camp, and I do believe with the creators of Days Gone that if they had a second chance at the bat, they would have knocked it out of the park. That's my belief. Because Days Gone, from all accounts, not a terrible game. Little uninspired, little generic, had some mechanics that some people liked and some people didn't like, right? But overall, and a story that was kind of hit or miss. But overall, I really do believe that Days Gone 2 would have performed. But they were never given that chance, so we live in a what-if scenario in that. And in that, what do they do now? I don't think Ben Studio survives the year.
It might not. And that'll be PlayStation will see this as, oh, well, they didn't deliver regardless of what we did, so let's cut them and save a check, save some money. Layoffs, I think, are inevitable. I think that's going to happen. We haven't seen a downward spiral of that. Well, we've seen it slow down a little bit, but that might just be because it's the beginning of the year. Things hadn't really started kicking off yet. So there is a lot of potential for it to still be a bloodbath of a year as far as layoffs go. And I think Ben Studio might be one of the first ones to go, though it would be completely unfair. I just hope if something's going to happen to them, as much as I don't want it to, layoffs would be more preferable than a studio closing down. Because you mentioned Days Gone 2. That
never going to happen.
No, it's not. No, but they would have improved. Clearly, they had something there that they could have built upon to make a seriously amazing game.
Everybody liked the motorcycle stuff, right?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. So expand on that. What could that be? I've said it before on this podcast. Death Stranding 2 is going to be better received than the first Death Stranding game. Because Kojima's Productions knows what they're dealing with. They know the formula they want to create. They know where they want to expound upon and so forth. And you saw an improvement from Death Stranding even into Death Stranding Director's Cut, where they added a bunch of new tools and a bunch of new vehicles and stuff to give a little more game to that game.
And in addition to that, you're aware of the channel Skill Up? They do YouTube videos.
Yeah, I've seen them. Yeah.
Recently, he released a video of his hands-on preview, with 20 hours of Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. He's a person who played the original game, and he admitted that game had some flaws, some bugs. It was also a really particular kind of game. Someone who wants more of that realistic element added to their games. And he's saying that the second one is that original game, but every single aspect is improved. Everything from what he said. And it's that same kind of vein of how game development goes. You make a game, even if it's something, as long as it has quality here and there, you can build upon that and fill up those potholes. You might not, but that's why you have second chances.
Right.
And Ben Studios, it was commercially successful, right? Or is it?
Not to the level that the expectations were high.
Oh, what are those expectations?
Sure, yes, but Ghost of Tsushima performed.
Yes.
Horizon Zero Dawn performed. God of War, Spider-Man, Last of Us, all of those IPs from that generation of games performed, right?
Big titles.
Days Gone did well, profited, but it didn't perform on the level that they wanted it to.
And that's kind of the issue, because are they holding those expectations to be held by new games compared to God of War or Uncharted or Last of Us? Or are they, bringing it down and saying, okay, this is the first game.
Bend also was never Naughty Dog. They were never Santa Monica. They weren't even Sucker Punch, right?
No.
And so, to hold them to that level, I think was also a mistake.
If they did, because their expectations are vague.
Right.
They never say what they are.
And expectations are so weird. To be on the other side of that curtain must be so interesting to have those conversations. Shuhei Yoshida, on his interview, again, talked about Horizon 1 to Horizon 2, while Horizon 2 was still quite successful with Forbidden West. It did not impact the way they thought it would. They thought it was going to go bigger. They thought it was going to deliver even larger than the first one did. And it didn't.
Mm-hmm.
Some of that might be because it launched in the same week as Elden Ring, right? And so now we have this funny little joke of Horizon being cursed and launching the same week as a highly influential, impactful game, a Breath of the Wild and Elden Ring, and then something else happened when the VR game got released that I forgot about. So it's just funny that keeps happening, and you could probably put some credence to that, but I think also pandemic times and being PS5 exclusive in a time where not everybody had a PS5. It's just, I don't know, it's tricky with all of this. Going back to Blue Point, God of War live service, what would that even look like?
You play as dwarves.
Oh, God, I don't want to do that. I definitely want to do that.
Yeah, I don't even know.
I don't know. A Diablo clone, maybe? Or no, because it would have had that same camera angle, right? Because it would have worked in the same engine and same typical gameplay system. But
did it confirm that?
No, nothing's been confirmed. We don't know.
I'm
hypothesizing here, right? So, but Blue Point, worked on God of War Ragnarok, helped make that game what it is, right? So, you would have, ideally, would have kind of played the same way. We would have just dived deeper into the RPG mechanics, I guess. Does anybody want that? That's the worst part of the God of War games.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't even know what that would have looked like. And, turning Blue Point into a live service studio would have been such a waste.
Kind of criminal.
I love Blue Point's works with remakes and remasters. Now, maybe they want to make something of their own.
Aren't they? Didn't they announce something? Like some weird
I think it
sci-fi
was this.
game?
I think it was this. No, they didn't announce anything. We've had no idea what Blue Point was doing.
Okay. Well,
No, we've had zero idea what Blue Point was doing. So, like, yeah, I don't know, man. I would have rathered any other alternative than Blue Point becoming a live service title. That was so disappointing to see. And on top of that, with an IP that nobody's asking for, and it circles back to your point of what is PlayStation's obsession with IP? Like, I mean, I guess I get it because Concord, new IP, new characters, new faces, and nobody cared, right? Like 0 people cared, even though the game was quality, but like nobody cared to even give it a chance to see that quality, right? So like now they're looking at, and then compare that with Helldivers 2, an IP, a 2, and it worked, right? But like, you know, you can't predict what's going to hit and what's not. It's impossible. You can have all of the marketing teams in the world with all of the speculation and you know, projections and all these types of things. If we put out this amount of commercials at this level of quality, it will produce X amount of dollars. Sure, maybe, but often probably not. You know, you know, like the expectations can never be accurate in any true form or fashion, especially in games. So you know, it just puts us in this tricky spot of like, what was all of this for? Now, we are in a new era of PlayStation now with Herman Holst and the other guy, whose name I always forget, now being co-CEOs of PlayStation. But we're still feeling the effects of the Jim Ryan era, clearly. We're going to continue to feel those effects for the next couple of years, probably. And it's probably going to be a while until we can turn this boat around. We're definitely going to be on the PlayStation 6 before we get any type of sort of resurgence from PlayStation Studios. So now I ask you, Connor, is the PlayStation 5 the worst generation of PlayStation?
It's shaping up to be so far. It just doesn't have the sauce as they did.
It doesn't.
Even PS4 time, which you could argue was the weakest before then, but still super strong.
No, PS3.
You're right. Never mind. No, well,
PS3, you see a lot of like really great IPs, but none of them really break through outside of what Naughty Dog is doing.
I think it's too soon to tell. By the end of it, PlayStation 5 will still be held higher. Because people because people at least will like enjoy the games a lot. People still buy games. But what games? 5.
What the argument is always what games. There's nothing new about PlayStation 5 outside of Returnal.
But the generation does include the console, which is the home console. Like back then, the PlayStation 3 was competing with the Nintendo Wii, the Xbox 360. Now it's the definitive, of course, Nintendo's its own space.
Right.
But they're the guy. There's no console war anymore like there was then. Yeah. Console war. So they're the big guys right now. They are the console supreme. That's something.
But they won it off the back of the greatness of 4. It's weird that you even brought up the 4. The 4, I think, is the best generation.
Yeah, no, I forgot about the 3. I was like, I would say like 2 because they kind of was formative. Or
2 you could attribute to sales, and 2 did perform as well, like really well as well. I mean, to me, it's 4. To me, 4 is the greatest. Right?
I think you could still argue 1 solely because of its importance in game development in general.
Yeah,
it goes beyond just Sony doing their
PlayStation, you know, PlayStation 1 moving into 3D graphics, Metal Gear Solid, Final Fantasy 7, 8, and 9.
Countless titles you had under your belt.
Escape. You know, a bunch of JRPGs and wonderful titles on the PlayStation 1. Absolutely, 100%. But I don't know. I feel like PS2 kind of expanded upon that. PS5 should be what the PS2 is, right? More of what came before. That was great, but just expanded upon in every way. And with more variety, more new IPs, more fresh IPs. And these live service titles were supposed to be that, and they're not.
No.
They're just not. We're even talking about the Helldivers 2 success. You know, Helldivers 2 sold more than Spider-Man 2. Whoa, that's incredible. But has Helldivers 2 long-lasting impact now that we are close to a year out been to the level and degree of what we would expect from other live service hits? I would argue no. But I still think where Helldivers 2 is today outperforms even what PlayStation was expecting for that game.
Yeah.
Right? Which, again, brings you back to expectations. What the fuck does that mean in this medium? You know? Helldivers 2 is outperforming every metric they could have possibly expected. Concord failed every metric that they were expecting, you know? So what do we do with that knowledge? What do we do with that information? What do we do with that revenue? And how do we continue to evolve this? I think Marathon is the only one that makes it out the gate from here on out. And even in that, I don't know if Marathon makes it.
Yeah, it might not be the highest quality of its kind.
Do you think Marathon launches? I think Marathon launches.
I think, it's too much. It's too late now.
You think so?
Yeah. I don't think it's like the live service titles we're hearing about here.
Okay.
Those had to have been not too far along, not as much money put into it as Marathon. I mean, they've announced, when did they announce Marathon? Years ago.
2021?
One?
No, it was recent. It was more recent than that. I was in Nacogdoches. 23 then? Must have been.
It could have been, yeah.
Yeah.
I
It
can't
must
recall.
early 20. I think it was in early 23 is when it was announced. It was announced the same showcase as Concord and Fair Games. And you know what's funny is the Concord trailer was so like limited that I was expecting Concord to come after Fair Games, and it came well before that. Do we see Fair Games? I don't think so.
I don't know.
I think that one's dead in the crib.
Marathon was 2020.
Yeah. So yeah, Marathon. I think we see probably next year, 26. Maybe even this year. Who knows? Depending on just what PlayStation is willing to commit to it. But they may just be wanting to get it out the door. But man, I don't know. I don't know.
Up in the air for certain.